Outlaws attack weak old man. They freeze when they see his tribal tattoo in the scorching heat of the desert. The wind howled through the tall, dry grass, carrying the scent of dust and danger. The town of Red Rock was a quiet place, hidden among the hills, far from the bustling cities and noisy railways. It was a place where secrets were buried in the earth, and the people who lived there kept their heads down, too afraid to speak up. The town had seen better days, but those days were long gone. The Apache people, who once roamed the land freely, had been pushed back into the mountains by settlers, soldiers, and outlaws. The land that was once theirs had been taken bit by bit. Now only a few families remained in the desert, trying to hold on to their culture and traditions, while others had been forced into hiding. One morning, as the sun rose high over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dry earth, a group of outlaws rode into Red Rock. They were led by a man known as Thorn, a cruel, heartless leader who had no respect for life. His gang had been terrorizing the Apache people for months, stealing from their villages, burning their homes, and leaving destruction in their wake. On this day, they had come for something more sinister. The outlaws had captured 7 young Apache girls from a nearby tribe, and now they were dragging them through the desert, bound and helpless. Their fate was sealed. They were to be left hanging from a tree as an example to the Apache people. No one dared defy Thorn and his men. The girls had been chosen for their youth and strength, their beauty and spirit. Thorn thought that by killing them he would break the Apaches' will to resist, but the girls, though frightened, held onto each other tightly, refusing to show fear in the face of death. The town of Red Rock knew about the outlaws' plan, but no one spoke up. The people were afraid of Thorn and his gang. They had seen what happened to those who opposed him. Whispers of rebellion had faded long ago, replaced by the fear of living under Thorn's rule. In the distance, a lone rider appeared on the dusty horizon. His name was Cole, a rancher who lived on the outskirts of Red Rock. He had lived a hard life, one shaped by loss and survival. Cole had seen the worst of the world, the bloodshed, the betrayals, the pain. His face was weathered, his eyes cold and distant, but his heart still beat with a sense of justice, though it had been buried deep inside for many years. He had been riding for hours, heading into town to pick up supplies when he saw the smoke rising in the distance. His eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. He urged his horse forward, feeling the pull of a duty he couldn't ignore. As he approached the clearing, the scene unfolded before him. 7 girls hung from a tree, their faces pale from the lack of oxygen. The sight stopped Cole in his tracks. His heart clenched, and his mind flashed back to the loss he had suffered many years ago. His family had been taken from him in a similar way, left for dead by a group of outlaws who thought they could get away with murder. But Cole wasn't like the people of Red Rock. He wasn't afraid to fight for what was right, even if it meant facing impossible odds. He spurred his horse forward, riding toward the girls. The outlaws, sitting around a campfire nearby, noticed him immediately. Thorn stood up from his seat and looked at Cole with a smirk. Well, what do we have here?" Thorn said, his voice dripping with mockery. "A lone rancher who thinks he can save these girls?" Cole didn't respond. He just looked at the girls, their eyes closed in unconsciousness, their bodies swaying in the breeze. They were so young, barely more than children, and yet they had already faced the worst the world had to offer. He dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The wind picked up again, carrying the dust into the air, but Cole didn't flinch. He pulled his rifle from its holster and aimed it at Thorn. "You're not going to kill them," Cole said, his voice low and steady. Thorn chuckled, stepping closer. "You think you can stop me? This is my land now, rancher, and I do as I please." The rest of the outlaws laughed, their eyes narrowing as they watched Cole, sizing him up. They had seen men like him before, brave but foolish. They didn't know that Cole had been through worse than anything they could throw at him. Cole took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Let them go, Thorn. You won't get away with this." For a moment there was silence. Then Thorn's smirk faded. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of his pistol. "You're a dead man, rancher." But Cole wasn't afraid. He had faced death before, and he was ready to face it again. He knew that these girls needed him, and he wasn't going to let them die without a fight. He leveled his rifle and fired. The bullet hit the ground near Thorn's feet, sending dust flying into the air. The outlaws drew their weapons, but Cole was already moving, quick as a rattlesnake. He dove behind a nearby rock, using it as cover as he prepared for what would surely be a long, bloody battle. But as the outlaws closed in, they hadn't noticed that one of the girls, a young Apache girl with dark eyes and a fierce spirit, had regained consciousness. She struggled against the ropes that bound her wrists, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't going to die like this. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dry desert landscape. The air shimmered with heat, and the wind swept through the tall, golden grass. Red Rock was a small town, nestled at the edge of the desert, surrounded by barren hills. It wasn't much, just a handful of houses and a few dusty roads, but it was home to the people who lived there, or at least it used to be. For many years, the Apache people had lived freely across this land. Their warriors roamed the mountains and deserts, protecting their people, their culture, and their way of life. But that was before the settlers came, before the army, and before the outlaws. The land had been taken from them, one piece at a time, until only a few small Apache groups remained, hiding away in the deep canyons and the distant hills. Today, 7 Apache girls were being dragged through the desert, their wrists bound by thick ropes. They were young, no older than 15 or 16, but their eyes held a fierce strength that belied their age. They had been captured by a group of outlaws, led by a man named Thorn, whose reputation for cruelty had spread far and wide. Thorn and his gang had been terrorizing the Apache for months, taking what they wanted and leaving nothing behind but destruction. The girls were meant to be a message, a warning to anyone who might think of standing up to Thorn's gang. The town of Red Rock knew about the girls. They knew what was happening, but no one dared to do anything. The outlaws were ruthless, and everyone in Red Rock had seen what happened to those who opposed them. The townspeople had learned to keep their heads down, to avoid trouble. There was no law here, no one to protect them from men like Thorn, so the people of Red Rock kept quiet, too afraid to help. As the girls were dragged through the streets of Red Rock, they were forced to march under the watchful eyes of Thorn's gang. Some of them stumbled, their legs weak from the long journey, but they didn't make a sound. They were proud, and they wouldn't let these men see them break. Their families had taught them to be strong, to fight for their people even in the face of death. The outlaws were making their way to the clearing on the edge of town where a large tree stood, its branches stretching high into the sky. This tree was a symbol, a warning. Anyone who dared defy Thorn would meet their end here. The outlaws had already set the trap. The girls would be left hanging from the tree, their lives slowly draining away. It was a cruel fate, but it was the kind of thing that Thorn enjoyed. He wanted to send a message to the Apache, and to anyone else who might be watching. But just as they reached the tree, a figure appeared on the horizon. It was a man on horseback, riding steadily toward the clearing. His face was weathered, his clothes simple but worn. This was no ordinary man. This was Cole, a rancher who lived on the outskirts of Red Rock. He wasn't from the town, but he came there often to trade and pick up supplies. Cole had seen much in his life, hardship, pain, and loss. His past was full of shadows, and his heart was weighed down by the ghosts of things he could never forget. He had been riding for hours, making his way through the desert, when he noticed the smoke rising from Red Rock. It was a thick, dark plume, unlike anything the town had ever produced. Cole's instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. He spurred his horse into a gallop, his thoughts racing. As he neared the edge of town, he could see the outlaws and the girls. He could see the cruel, twisted smiles on the outlaws' faces as they prepared to hang the girls. He didn't know what had happened or how they had come to be in this situation, but he knew one thing: he couldn't just ride away. Cole pulled his horse to a stop, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He stood still for a moment, surveying the scene. The outlaws were too busy laughing and talking among themselves to notice him. But Cole wasn't concerned about them. Not yet. His eyes were locked on the girls, their faces pale from the heat, their bodies weak from exhaustion. They were hanging by their wrists, their heads tilted forward in unconsciousness. His heart clenched at the sight. He had seen death before, but this was different. These were children. They were helpless, and no one was doing anything to save them. His mind raced with memories of his own loss, the day his family had been taken from him. The pain still lingered, a raw wound that never healed. He had vowed never to let anyone suffer like that again. He knew he had to act. He didn't know how, but he couldn't just walk away. Not this time. Thorn noticed him then. The man was tall, with a dark beard and cold eyes. He looked Cole up and down, sizing him up like a predator watching its prey. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Thorn said, his voice mocking. "A lone rancher who thinks he can stop us?" Cole didn't answer. He simply dismounted from his horse and took a few slow, deliberate steps toward the tree where the girls hung. The outlaws watched him, their hands hovering over their weapons, but they didn't draw them just yet. They thought he was just some fool, thinking he could make a difference. "Let them go," Cole said, his voice low but steady. "They're not yours to kill." Thorne laughed, stepping forward. "And what are you going to do about it, rancher? You think you can stop me?" "I own this land now. These girls are nothing but pawns in my game." "I'm not letting you kill them," Cole said, his hand resting on the handle of his rifle. His fingers twitched, ready to draw if needed. Thorne's smile faded. "You're a brave man, I'll give you that. But it won't save you." Cole didn't flinch. He stood tall, ready to fight if it came to that. He wasn't afraid of Thorne or his men. What he feared more than anything was the idea of leaving these girls to die. The sun had dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the desert as Cole and Jeb crouched behind the large boulder. Their plan was set. The time had come for action, and the weight of the moment pressed heavily on them both. There was no turning back now. Cole's heart pounded in his chest. He was ready. The only thing standing between him and the Apache girls' freedom was the outlaw gang. Their cruel laughter still echoed through the air from the other side of the clearing where they had set up camp. Thorne and his men were busy drinking and celebrating their victory, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Cole glanced at Jeb, the old lawman who had joined him in this risky venture. Jeb had been in enough fights to know the risks, but tonight there was a new fire in his eyes, a fire that had been rekindled by the injustice that had taken root in Red Rock. He had failed to protect his town from the outlaws years ago, but tonight he had a chance to make things right. "You sure about this?" Jeb asked, his voice low but steady. Cole nodded. "I've got no choice. We save those girls, or we let Thorne keep spreading fear." "I won't let him do that." Jeb gripped the handle of his revolver and gave Cole a brief nod. "Then let's do this." The plan was simple but dangerous. Cole and Jeb would create a distraction, drawing the outlaws' attention away from the girls. While the gang was distracted, Cole would free the girls. It was their only shot. With a deep breath, Cole rose to his feet, motioning for Jeb to follow. They moved carefully, staying low, until they were within range of the outlaws. The wind had picked up, howling across the desert, and the dust in the air made it harder for the outlaws to see them. This was their chance. Cole pulled a small bundle of rocks from his saddlebag and threw one toward the far edge of the camp. The rock clattered against the dry earth, sending a sharp noise into the air. It wasn't much, but it was enough to catch the attention of a few of the outlaws. "Thorne, something's out there," one of the men shouted, his hand going to the pistol at his side. Thorne stood up from his campfire, his face hardening. "Stay alert. We've got company." The rest of the gang quickly reached for their weapons. Cole and Jeb didn't waste any time. They dashed toward the other side of the camp, where the outlaws had left their horses tied up. They moved in silence, their footsteps soft against the dry ground. Cole's eyes were fixed on the girls. They were still hanging from the tree, but their eyes were open now, their faces filled with pain. Their wrists were raw from the ropes, and their bodies swayed slightly in the wind. But despite the torment, they were alive. Cole could feel his pulse quicken as he approached the tree. He crouched down and untied the ropes that held the first girl. Her body fell limp in his arms, but he held her tightly, trying to keep her from slipping into unconsciousness. Her breath was shallow, but she was alive. "Help them," Cole whispered, turning to Jeb, who was freeing another girl. Jeb worked quickly, his hands moving fast to untie the knots. Just as they were about to free the last of the girls, a loud gunshot rang out, shattering the silence. The distraction had worked, but not as well as they'd hoped. Thorne had noticed them, and now the gang was closing in fast. "Move!" Cole shouted. "Get them to the horses!" Cole and Jeb grabbed the girls, lifting them onto the horses with swift, practiced movements. The girls were weak, but they held on, their faces pale and tired. The wind whipped through their hair as the sound of galloping hooves filled the air. Thorne and his men were behind them now, shooting into the night, their gunfire echoing off the hills. Jeb and Cole led the girls through the desert at full speed, their horses charging over the rough ground. The gang was close, but they were slow on horseback, struggling to keep up with the fast riders. They rode hard, but Cole could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They had to make it to the canyon. If they could reach it, they would be safe. The narrow, winding paths would make it hard for the outlaws to follow. But the gang was relentless, and Cole could hear the pounding of hooves growing louder behind them. One of the girls, her name was Kaya, suddenly cried out in pain, and Cole turned to see her slumping to one side. Her body had given out, and she was barely holding on. "Hang in there, Kaya," Cole shouted, his voice urgent. "We're almost there." But just as they rounded a sharp bend, a loud shot rang out, striking Kaya in the side. She gasped, her body going limp in Cole's arms. "No!" Cole shouted, his voice breaking. He pulled his horse to a stop, sliding Kaya off and onto the ground. She was breathing heavily, blood soaking through her clothes. Jeb quickly pulled his horse back. "We can't stop here, Cole. They're closing in." But Cole didn't listen. He knelt beside Kaya, holding her hand as her life slipped away. "You're safe now," he whispered, but she could barely hear him. Her eyes fluttered one last time, and then she was gone. Cole's heart ached with the loss, but there was no time to mourn. He had to keep going. He stood up and grabbed Kaya's rifle, turning to face the approaching outlaws. Jeb was already at the ready, his revolver drawn and aimed at Thorn, who was riding hard toward them. "It's not over yet, Cole," Jeb said, his eyes steely. Cole nodded, the anger inside him burning brighter than ever. "It won't be over until we end it." The outlaws charged forward, their guns raised, but Cole and Jeb were ready. The final battle was coming, and this time it would be the outlaws who wouldn't walk away. The sound of hooves pounding the earth grew louder as the outlaws closed in on Cole and Jeb. The narrow path they were on wound through the canyon, the steep walls rising on either side, but it wasn't enough to hide them from the relentless pursuit. The horses were fast, but the gang had numbers on their side, and the sun had long set, leaving only the moonlight to guide them. Cole could feel the weight of Kaya's death pressing down on him. She had died in his arms, a life taken too soon, and it was a pain that would stay with him forever. But he couldn't dwell on it now. He had to stay focused. The girls depended on him, and they couldn't stop, not when the outlaws were this close. Jeb, riding beside him, gritted his teeth. The old lawman's hands were steady on his revolver, and he kept his eyes on the narrow path ahead. "We need to get to the old mine," he said, his voice low but urgent. "If we make it there, we've got a fighting chance." Cole nodded, his jaw clenched. The old mine was a place he knew well. He'd spent many days working the land around it. The narrow tunnels and hidden caves would give them a chance to regroup and fight back. It was their last hope. Behind them, the sound of the outlaws' horses grew louder, and Cole could see Thorn's figure at the front of the group, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The outlaw leader was closing in, and the fight was about to begin. "Stay close," Cole shouted to the girls who were riding just behind them. They were weak, but they were holding on, their faces filled with determination. They were survivors, each one of them stronger than they knew. Thorn's voice rang out from behind them. "You can't outrun us forever, Rancher. There's nowhere to hide." Cole didn't respond. Instead, he urged his horse forward, pushing it to go faster. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them as they neared the mine. The path grew narrower, the rocks jagged and uneven, but it was the only way out. Jeb glanced over his shoulder and saw the outlaws gaining ground. "We're running out of time," he muttered. "They'll be on us any minute." Cole's mind raced. They had to make it to the mine. It was the only chance they had to stand their ground. As they neared the entrance to the mine, Cole's heart skipped a beat. The old wooden gate, once sturdy and strong, was now barely hanging on its hinges. The mine had been abandoned for years, but it would have to do. Cole signaled for Jeb to pull ahead, and the two of them quickly dismounted, helping the girls off their horses. The sound of the outlaws' horses grew louder, and Cole could hear their shouts as they rode into the canyon. "Get inside now," Cole ordered, his voice firm. The girls scrambled toward the mine entrance, their faces filled with fear but determination. Cole and Jeb followed closely behind, entering the dark tunnel just as the first of the outlaws rode into view. The mine was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. It was quiet for a moment, the only sound the rush of their breath and the scrape of boots against the stone floor. But it wouldn't be quiet for long. The outlaws would come looking for them, and when they did, Cole and Jeb would be ready. "Get to the back," Cole whispered to the girls. "Stay hidden. We'll handle this." Jeb nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They'll come in fast. We have to be ready." The girls nodded, understanding the danger. They huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide but determined. Cole and Jeb drew their guns, the sound of the clicks echoing in the silence. The outlaws soon reached the entrance of the mine, their horses snorting and shifting impatiently. Thorn led the way, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He was no longer laughing. The hunt had become serious, and he was eager to finish it. "Come out, Rancher," Thorn's voice boomed. "You can't hide forever." But Cole wasn't going to make it easy for him. He and Jeb crouched low, waiting for the sound of the outlaws' footsteps to grow closer. The tension in the air was thick, and Cole's heart raced as he kept his eyes fixed on the entrance. "Ready?" Jeb whispered. Cole didn't respond. Instead, he nodded, his finger tightening on the trigger. The first outlaw stepped into the mine, his footsteps echoing in the dark. He was a tall man, with a scar running down his face. He stepped into the beam of moonlight coming through the entrance, and didn't see Cole until it was too late. Cole fired first, the bullet hitting the man in the chest. He fell without a sound, his body crumpling to the ground. The rest of the gang burst in behind him, guns raised, but they weren't prepared for the ambush. Jeb fired next, his shot hitting another outlaw in the leg. The man screamed in pain, falling to the ground, and the others hesitated, unsure of how to react. Cole and Jeb didn't give them time to think. They fired again, taking down another outlaw with each shot. The girls stayed hidden, their eyes wide with fear but also with hope. They had seen the courage in Cole and Jeb, and they knew that the battle was far from over. Thorne, now at the back of the group, raised his pistol, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can defeat me, Rancher? I will make sure you pay for this." Cole's voice was cold and steady as he aimed his gun at Thorne. "You've already lost, Thorne." The outlaw leader sneered, but before he could fire, Jeb shot him in the arm, sending his pistol flying. Thorne staggered back, his face pale with fury. "You'll regret this," he spat, but it was clear that the fight had gone out of him. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. They were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Cole and Jeb didn't lower their guns. "You're going to jail," Cole said, his voice unwavering, "and you'll stay there. The outlaws were caught. The girls were free.